You think you really know someone, right? Well, I thought I knew Sophia, my wife, the woman I promised to spend my life with. Those first few months felt like a dream. Breakfast in bed, late-night movies, spontaneous road trips. We talked about kids, our dream house, vacations we'd take. But somewhere along the way, things started to crack, even though I didn't want to admit it. At first, I couldn't see it. Who wants to believe their perfect life might not be? Life's a fantasy until it comes crashing down, right? It started with the little things. At first, I brushed them off. You know how it is. Marriage is new, and you expect to make adjustments. But those little things build up. They always do. One evening, I noticed Sophia sitting on the couch, texting. Nothing out of the ordinary there. She's always on her phone. But this time, something felt off. The second I stepped into the room, she quickly tucked the phone under her leg, almost like she was trying to hide it. "What's up?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She looked up and gave me that fake smile, the one she didn't have before we got married. "It's just work stuff," she said, waving the phone like it didn't matter. I nodded, pretending everything was fine, but something didn't sit right. Her gaze was too deliberate, her body too protective of her phone. And then, as if on cue, she stood up and walked into another room. That was the first time I felt it, this strange, unsettling feeling deep in my stomach. But I tried to brush it off. Maybe I was just being paranoid. Maybe I was just tired. But it lingered. A few weeks later, we went to a party at a friend's house. I was trying to be the easygoing husband, chatting with friends and enjoying the night. Sophia looked stunning, like always, but something was different. The way she moved, the way her eyes scanned the room, almost like she was searching for someone. I noticed it, but I told myself I was just imagining things. And then I saw him. Ethan Blake. Not really a friend of mine, more like a casual acquaintance. Tall, well-dressed, and way too confident for my liking. The way he smiled at Sophia made my teeth grind. But what really got to me was the way she looked at him. There was a spark in her eyes I hadn't seen in ages, not since the early days of our marriage. Then it happened. His hand brushed against hers, a quick, subtle touch, barely noticeable to anyone else. But I saw it. And the worst part? She didn't pull away. She smiled instead. I tried to stay calm, but inside, my mind was racing. What was going on? I felt like I was watching something unfold right in front of me, like I was the only one aware that things were unraveling. It was like being in the middle of a burning building and realizing no one else had noticed the fire. After the party, I didn't confront her outright, but I tried to get her talking. "So, Ethan, huh?" I said casually as we drove home. She rolled her eyes and laughed, but it didn't feel genuine. "What? Don't be ridiculous. He's just a friend." "Just a friend?" I thought. Isn't that always the line? When we got home, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying everything. The laugh, the way Ethan's hand touched hers, and that look in her eyes. I had to talk to someone, so I called my friend Lucas Ward the next day. Lucas is the logical one, the voice of reason. "You're overthinking it, man," he said when I told him everything. "Everyone flirts a little. It's harmless. You've got to give her some space. Life's stressful right now. Work, everything piling up." I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to. I wanted to think I was just being paranoid and that everything between Sophia and me was fine. But deep down, I knew something was off. "You think so?" I asked, trying to sound convinced. Lucas's advice came next. "Look, Nathan, you love her. You two are still figuring things out. Don't go looking for problems where there aren't any. Just talk to her. Give her some space." So, that's what I did. I gave her space. I gave her time. And what did I get? A wife who pulled further and further away each day. In the weeks that followed, things didn't improve. Sophia became colder, more distant. Conversations that used to be easy became awkward, forced. She stopped laughing at my jokes. She stopped cuddling with me on the couch during movie nights. She even started sleeping on the far edge of the bed, like the extra inches of space could hide the emotional gap growing between us. Every time I tried to talk to her, she shut me down. "You're overreacting," she'd snap. "Not everything's about you, Nathan." Maybe she was right. Maybe it wasn't all about me, but it sure felt like it. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. She was on her phone again, typing away with that damn smile on her face. And I lost it. "Who are you texting at 11 at night, Sophia?" My voice was louder than I meant it to be. She looked up, the amusement on her face vanishing in an instant. "Jesus, Nathan. It's Hannah. We've been over this." "Then show me," I demanded. Her eyes narrowed, and for a split second, I saw something flash across her face. Guilt? Maybe. Or fear. It was gone as quickly as it came. "You don't trust me?" she whispered, her voice low and dangerous. "No, I don't," I shot back. "Not when you act like this." She stood up, anger burning in her eyes. "You know what your problem is? You always think the worst of me. You can't handle the thought that maybe I'm not sitting here plotting against you. Maybe I just want some space." The argument spiraled out of control from there, pulling up old wounds and insecurities. By the time it ended, we were both exhausted and furious. She stormed off to the bedroom, slamming the door behind her, and I sat there on the couch, my head in my hands, wondering how we ended up like this. That night, as I lay awake on the couch, it hit me. This wasn't just a rough patch. This wasn't just the usual stress of married life. Something was seriously wrong between us. And no matter how much I wanted to deny it, the truth was staring me right in the face. Sophia was slipping away, little by little. And the worst part? I had no idea how to stop it. After the fight, I tried to tell myself I was being paranoid, that it was all in my head. Marriages go through phases, right? This was just one of those rough patches people always talk about. But that nagging feeling in my gut never went away. It was there all the time. When I woke up, when I went to work, and especially when I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, knowing Sophia was just a few feet away but feeling like I didn't know her at all anymore. I tried to act like things were normal, hoping if I played it cool, maybe things would smooth over. But it was impossible to ignore how she was distancing herself from me. The way she kept her phone face down all the time. The way she'd leave the room whenever I walked in. I started to shut myself off emotionally. Talking about it seemed useless. Every time I tried, it ended the same way. Her accusing me of being controlling, making me feel like I was losing my grip on reality. Eventually, I just stopped trying to argue. I withdrew. It felt easier, but inside, the betrayal was eating me up. I kept telling myself to trust her, but every time I saw that look in her eyes, the one she had at the party when Ethan touched her hand, it felt like someone was digging a knife into my gut. I couldn't stop seeing it. Then, one night out of nowhere, Bree showed up at my door. It had been months since I'd seen her, and there was something unsettling about her sudden appearance, standing there holding a bottle of wine, grinning like she'd known the exact moment to show up. She always had that knack for showing up when you needed her most, with that knowing look in her eyes, like she could see through all your walls. "Figured you might need someone to talk to," she said, lifting the wine like it was the answer to everything. I didn't protest. I stepped aside and let her in. We ended up in the kitchen, sitting at the same small table where Sophia and I used to have breakfast together. Bree poured 2 glasses of wine and then leaned forward, her eyes sharp, like she was already reading me. "Something's not right," she said, no question in her tone. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "It's Sophia. Things between us, they've been off. She's distant. I don't know what's going on." Bree nodded like she'd been expecting me to say that. "You feel like she's pulling away?" "Yeah," I muttered, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know why. I keep trying to make things work, but it's like she's somewhere else. Like she's not really here with me anymore." Bree reached across the table and placed a hand on my shoulder, her touch warm and firm. "I know how tough that can be. It's easy to drive yourself crazy, wondering if you're imagining things. But you need to be sure before you make any big moves. You can't accuse her of something unless you've got the proof." I stared into my glass, swirling the wine around. "I don't know, Bree. I'm not even sure what I'd accuse her of." She tilted her head slightly, studying me like she was trying to make sense of everything. "Let me help you. Women notice things men don't. If there's something going on, we'll find it." At first, I wanted to say no. I hated the idea of spying on my own wife. It felt like admitting I didn't trust her, which was the last thing I wanted to face. But the truth was, I didn't trust her anymore. Not with the way she was acting. And Bree's offer, as much as I hated myself for accepting it, felt like the only way I could get answers. So just like that, Bree and I became partners in this twisted quest to uncover the truth. We started with Sophia's social media. Bree dove in, going through every post, every comment, every tagged photo. At first, we didn't find much, just a few messages from Ethan. Nothing that screamed proof, but enough to make my stomach tighten. She'd been talking to him even before our wedding, and the conversations weren't anything out of the ordinary, but the timing? That didn't sit right. "Look at this," Bree said, pointing at a message. "This was 2 weeks before your wedding. She's already talking to him like that?" I tried to brush it off. "It doesn't mean anything. People talk to old friends all the time." Bree shot me a look that told me she wasn't buying it. Maybe. Or maybe she's been building something with him for a while, and you never saw it. That thought made my stomach churn. I wanted to stop right then, but Bree wasn't done. She pushed me to go further. "If we're going to know the truth," she said, "we need to see it with our own eyes." So, there I was, sitting in a parked car outside Ethan's apartment a few nights later, with Bree next to me. I felt like a creep, sitting there with the engine off, watching the building like some kind of stalker. But I couldn't look away. Bree kept me grounded, her presence oddly comforting. The first couple of nights were boring, just people coming and going. No sign of Sophia. I started thinking I was losing it, that maybe I'd been chasing shadows. But then, on the third night, it happened. We were parked a block away, sipping coffee to stay awake when we saw Ethan's car pull up. And there she was, Sophia, sliding out of the passenger seat, looking more relaxed than I'd seen her in months. My chest tightened as I watched her lean toward him, saying something that made him laugh. And then, without hesitation, she followed him inside. My heart dropped. I couldn't breathe. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. Bree didn't say anything. She just placed her hand on my arm, grounding me. She knew words wouldn't help in that moment. It felt like my whole world had shattered, and I was powerless to stop it. I wanted to storm in, to drag Sophia out and demand an explanation. But Bree stopped me. "Not yet," she whispered softly. "You need all the facts before you confront her. Otherwise, she'll twist it, make you the bad guy." She was right, but that didn't make it easier. Sitting in that car, staring at the dark windows of the apartment building, I felt the anger bubbling up inside me, sharp and bitter. I was burning with rage, like a wound that wouldn't heal. Bree squeezed my arm. "You'll get your chance," she whispered. "But not like this. You have to be smart." I nodded, though every part of me screamed to go after them. But I stayed put, sitting there, boiling inside as the night stretched on. I could feel something dangerous stirring inside me. This wasn't just about Sophia anymore. This was about betrayal, about being made a fool of. And I wasn't going to let it go. Not this time. As I drove Bree home that night, I realized something. There was no turning back now. Whatever happened next, the life I thought I had with Sophia was over. The question now was how far I was willing to go to make sure Sophia faced the consequences of what she'd done. After that night outside Ethan's apartment, I was done pretending everything was okay. There was no going back to the way things had been. I didn't know how I was going to confront her, but I knew it was inevitable. I was just waiting for the right time and the right proof to back me up. Bree had been right about one thing. Without hard evidence, Sophia would twist things around and make it all my fault. She was a master at that. Too good at it. I was barely holding myself together, and it felt like Bree was the only person who understood. After hours of sitting in silence in that car, Bree placed a hand on my shoulder and gave me a sympathetic look. "You can crash at my place tonight," she said quietly. "No point in driving home like this." I didn't want to go back to my house anyway. Not to the empty bed or the constant reminder of Sophia and everything that was falling apart. I agreed, and we drove in silence to Bree's place, just a few blocks away. When we arrived, she kicked off her shoes and grabbed a bottle of wine from the kitchen. "Might as well drink, right?" she said with a tired smile. I nodded, following her to the couch. The wine wasn't anything special, but at that moment, I didn't care. Anything to numb the raw anger and humiliation that was eating away at me. We talked for a while, but it wasn't about anything important. It was the kind of conversation you have just to fill the silence, to push away the thoughts that threaten to overwhelm you. We talked about life, about how marriage isn't what either of us expected. She vented a little about my dad, about how he never really listened to her. I let a few things slip about Sophia, more than I probably should have, but I didn't care. The wine was working its way through me, loosening my guard, and the comfort of having someone to talk to made it feel safer, easier. Somewhere between the third and fourth glass, the air between us shifted. I felt it before it even happened, the subtle change in how she looked at me. She leaned in a little closer, her hand brushing against mine. "You've really grown up these past few years," she murmured, her voice low and warm. It was such a simple thing to say, but it hit me hard. I looked at her, really looked at her, and realized just how close we were sitting. Her perfume, the warmth of her skin, it was overwhelming. And I didn't move away. I didn't stop it. Our eyes locked, and suddenly the tension between us became unbearable. All the emotions I'd been trying to ignore, the anger, the betrayal, the sadness, came rushing to the surface. And Bree was right there, close and familiar, offering something I hadn't felt in a long time, comfort, attention, maybe even a little desire. She placed her hand on my knee, slow and deliberate. I knew where this was going. I knew I should have stopped it, but I didn't. Part of me didn't want to stop it. I wanted it to happen. Her hand slid higher, and I felt a wave of something I couldn't quite name. Some mix of fear and desire, guilt and relief. And just like that, the walls between us crumbled. The kiss was sudden, sharp, like a spark catching fire. I tasted the wine on her lips, and before I knew it, we were tangled together on the couch. Hands everywhere, clothes being pulled off in a blur of heat and desperation. Bree whispered things to me, soft, seductive words that made me forget, just for a little while, everything else. She offered to go further, and in that hazy, wine-soaked moment, I didn't say no. I let it happen, and before I could think twice, we were tangled in something raw, reckless, and wrong in every way. But in that brief moment, it also felt like a release. Like I was finally taking back something, anything, after everything Sophia had taken from me. For a fleeting second, I felt free. Free from the lies. Free from the humiliation. Free from the weight of my failing marriage. But that wasn't the end of it. As soon as it was over, guilt hit me like a freight train. I lay there, breathing hard, staring at the ceiling, wondering what the hell I had just done. Bree curled up beside me, running her fingers lightly over my chest, as though this was the most natural thing in the world. Maybe to her, it was. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? I'd crossed a line I couldn't uncross, and there was no going back from it. What shocked me the most, though, was how little I regretted it. Part of me knew it was wrong. I knew I'd betrayed not just Sophia, but my dad too. But another part of me felt satisfaction. Like the scales had finally tipped in my favor. Like I wasn't the only one who had been breaking the rules. The next morning, Bree acted like nothing had happened. She got up, made coffee, and smiled at me like we'd just had a normal conversation the night before. "You can always count on me," she said as she handed me a cup. There was no awkwardness, no guilt on her end, just easy, casual acceptance of what had happened. We didn't talk about it. We didn't need to. It was one of those unspoken agreements, where both of us knew better than to bring it up. Whatever happened that night, it would stay buried. I left her place feeling numb, like I was walking through someone else's life. As I drove home, the events of the night before played in my head over and over. The release, the feeling of liberation, the crushing weight of knowing that I just made everything infinitely more complicated. When I walked through the door of my house, Sophia wasn't home. I stood there for what felt like forever, staring at the empty living room. It was like stepping into a stranger's life. There was no going back now. Everything had changed. The morning after what happened with Bree, I couldn't shake the feeling that I just detonated a bomb, one whose effects hadn't fully hit yet. Guilt? Yes. But there was something darker tangled up with it. Something that made it feel like I wasn't just making a mistake. It was an act of revenge. A way to claw back some control that had been slipping from my hands since I first suspected Sophia had been cheating. But now? The lines between right and wrong were completely blurred. I wasn't sure which betrayal hurt more, mine or hers. Either way, I couldn't live with it anymore. I needed to confront her. I needed answers. I spent the entire day rehearsing what I was going to say. But when Sophia finally came home that evening, all my plans went out the window. She strolled in like nothing was wrong, set her purse down, scrolling through her phone like the world hadn't just crumbled around us. I stood there, watching her, waiting for the right moment. My heart was pounding in my chest. This was it. No more pretending, Sophia, I said, my voice steady but heavy. We need to talk. She looked up at me, an eyebrow raised. What now, Nathan? I gritted my teeth, trying to keep my cool. You've been seeing Ethan? Her face barely shifted. What? No, I haven't. Jesus, Nathan, you're losing it. I pulled my phone from my pocket, the weight of the evidence in my hand. Don't lie to me, I said, my voice rough. I showed her the screenshots Bree and I had found. Her face froze for a second, just long enough for me to see the briefest flicker of panic. Then she forced a smile, one I was all too familiar with. That's nothing. Just some flirting. It doesn't mean anything. Don't lie, Dahlia. I shot back, my voice low and tight with anger. You've been sneaking around with him. I followed you. I saw you leave his car and go into his apartment. For a brief moment, her cocky attitude faltered, just long enough for me to see something behind her eyes. Guilt? Panic? I wasn't sure, but it didn't last. So what? She snapped, folding her arms across her chest. You've been distant, obsessed, and pushed me away. It's not like you've been perfect either. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You're blaming me? I couldn't keep the shock out of my voice. You're the one who cheated. Her shoulders lifted in a shrug, her tone icy and without an ounce of remorse. I didn't plan it. It just happened. Those words hit me harder than I expected, like a punch to the gut. I felt something inside me snap. My rage flooded in, uncontrollable. I grabbed her stuff, clothes, shoes, whatever I could grab, and hurled it toward the door. Get out, I growled, my chest heaving. Get the hell out of my house. She froze for a moment, stunned. Then, that bitter sneer twisted her face. It was a mistake, okay? She spat, her voice laced with resentment. I wasn't thinking clearly. But you, her words stung, like knives. You never really understood me. I stood there, my fists clenched at my sides, trying not to let her see how deeply her words cut. She grabbed her bag and stormed toward the door without a second glance. She paused right before stepping out, glancing back over her shoulder. Good luck, Nathan. You'll need it. And with that, she was gone. Just like that. I stood there, in the doorway, staring after her as she disappeared into the night. I'd been waiting for this moment, imagining it over and over. But now that it was real, all I felt was a hollow ache in my chest. Later, Lucas came by. I hadn't called him, but somehow, he knew. Without saying much, he walked in, gave me a sympathetic nod, and grabbed a couple of beers from the fridge. We sat on the couch in silence for a while, the weight of everything pressing down on me. Rough night, he asked, finally breaking the quiet. You have no idea, I muttered, swallowing my beer. We talked about Sophia, about the fight, the messages, and everything else. But I didn't mention Bree. I couldn't. That part was too much, too heavy, and I wasn't ready to share it with anyone, even Lucas. The guilt? I buried it. There were just some things you keep to yourself. The days after that felt like a blur. Legal documents, phone calls, arguments. Sophia wanted a divorce, and she wanted it all. Her share of the house, the money, everything we'd built together. Even though she was the one who had destroyed it all. The process dragged on, draining me of whatever was left of my energy. Each meeting with her felt like reopening an old wound, and as the days passed, it became harder to remember why I had ever loved her in the first place. A few weeks into the divorce, I ran into Ethan at a bar. I was sitting there, nursing my drink, trying to forget everything for just a few minutes. Then I saw him across the room. He noticed me too. Instead of looking guilty or ashamed, the bastard just grinned and raised his glass in a silent toast. Something inside me snapped. I slammed my drink down on the bar, my fists already clenched as I crossed the room in a few quick strides. Before I even thought about it, I grabbed him by the collar and shoved him against the wall. "You think this is funny?" I snarled, my voice barely controlled. "You think you can just take everything from me and walk away?" Ethan didn't flinch. If anything, his smirk got bigger. "Sophia's with me now," he said, his voice dripping with satisfaction. "Guess you weren't enough for her." That was it. I swung before I even realized what I was doing. My fist cracked against his jaw, and I could feel a brief sense of satisfaction as he staggered back. But before I could go after him again, the bartender and a couple of people grabbed me, pulling me off him. Ethan just laughed, wiping blood from his lip as he watched me struggle. "Take it easy, man," one of the guys holding me said. "He's not worth it." Maybe they were right. Maybe none of it was worth it. But in that moment, I couldn't see anything but red. I wanted to make him feel what I was feeling. The pain, the humiliation, the helplessness. Eventually, they let me go, and I stumbled out into the night. My knuckles burned, my heart was pounding, and the cold air hit me like a slap to the face. As I stood there on the sidewalk, I realized just how far I had fallen. My marriage was over. My life was in pieces, and all I had left was the bitter satisfaction of knowing I had fought back. The divorce process wasn't just legal. It was like watching everything I'd known slowly unravel. The worst part? Even as I tried to pick up the pieces of my life, the memory of that night with Bree kept lingering. It was a stain I couldn't scrub off, no matter how hard I tried to forget. It was always there, haunting me, reminding me that I wasn't innocent in all of this. I thought confronting Sophia would bring me closure. I thought it would set me free. But the truth was, the damage had been done, and no amount of revenge would heal it. After the divorce, I didn't know where to go. So, I ended up back at my dad's place. Moving in with him felt like surrender, like I was admitting defeat, accepting that the life I thought I would have was gone. The house felt the same, but it wasn't. It didn't feel like home anymore. And to make things worse, Bree was still there, acting like nothing had changed between us. The night we shared was a secret, one I carried around like a weight strapped to my chest. It didn't eat away at me exactly, but every time I crossed paths with her, whether in the kitchen or the hallway, there was this quiet, heavy tension between us, one neither of us acknowledged but both of us felt. We didn't talk about what had happened. Neither of us needed to. It hung between us like a silent agreement, always there, just beneath the surface, a constant reminder of the mess we'd made. And somehow, despite everything, I kept getting drawn further into it. Bree had a way of making me feel seen, something I hadn't felt in years. Not with Sophia, not with anyone, but it was tangled up with guilt, shame, and regret. A trap I couldn't seem to escape. Months passed in this strange limbo where I pretended everything was fine, even though the memory of that night kept resurfacing, haunting me. Then one evening, Bree knocked on my door. She looked nervous, more nervous than I'd ever seen her before. I could tell something was wrong before she even spoke. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm pregnant." The words hit me like a sucker punch, knocking the wind out of me. Pregnant. I stared at her, my mind racing as I tried to process what she just said. She was pregnant, and we both knew there was a chance the baby could be mine. She sat down on the edge of the bed, wringing her hands nervously. "We can't tell Victor." "Not yet," she added, her voice trembling. I nodded, even though every part of me screamed that this was a disaster waiting to happen. Keeping a secret like this felt like walking around with a ticking time bomb. I could already feel the pressure building, knowing it was only a matter of time before everything blew up. At first, Victor didn't notice anything, but as the weeks passed, he started picking up on the small changes: strange behavior, mood swings, the way she avoided drinking at family dinners. He wasn't an idiot. He knew something was off, and it didn't take long for his suspicions to land squarely on me. One night, during a family dinner, he dropped the bomb. "What's going on between you two?" His eyes locked onto mine, sharp and accusing. "I know something happened." I froze, caught in the spotlight, and Bree, sitting across from me, didn't say a word. Her silence was all the confirmation Victor needed. He stood up slowly, his face hardening with rage. "Don't lie to me," he growled. "Did you sleep with her?" I tried to deny it, but my words felt empty, hollow. "Nothing happened," I muttered, though I knew he didn't believe me. Victor's jaw clenched, and before I could even react, he launched himself at me. His fist hit my face with a sickening crack, sending me stumbling back into the wall. We were on each other, grappling, fists flying, anger boiling over as years of resentment poured out. We fought like men with too much history, too many wounds to keep buried. "Tell me the truth," he shouted, pinning me against the wall. Bree's voice finally broke through the chaos. "The baby," she said, her voice shaky but steady. "It might not be yours, Victor." Everything stopped. Victor's anger faltered for a moment, replaced by disbelief. The room was dead silent, the weight of her admission hanging in the air like a heavy fog. And then, without another word, Victor turned and stormed out of the house, leaving us both standing there, broken and stunned. The next few days were a blur of silence and tension. Victor filed for divorce. He packed up his things and left without a word, without even a goodbye. He also served me with a legal notice demanding I leave the house within 30 days. I was homeless, jobless, and had nowhere else to turn. I ended up crashing on Lucas's couch, too ashamed to ask anyone else for help. Lucas did his best to be there for me, but he knew I was spiraling. Losing Sophia was one thing. Losing my father on top of it? That was a blow I couldn't have prepared for. It felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me, and I was free-falling into nothing. The depression set in hard. I stopped responding to texts, stopped going out, stopped caring about anything. My days blurred together as I stared at the ceiling, drank too much, and wondered how my life had turned into this nightmare. There were nights when the darkness felt so heavy, I could barely breathe. I even thought about ending it all, just slipping away and leaving everything behind. But Lucas wouldn't let me go that easily. One night, after he'd taken a near-empty bottle of whiskey from my hand, he sat me down and said, "You can't keep doing this, man. You need to talk to your dad. At least try to make things right." At first, I refused. What was the point? Victor hated me now, but Lucas didn't let up. Eventually, I caved and sent a text, not really expecting a response. To my surprise, Victor agreed to meet. We met at a small cafe, both of us tense, sitting awkwardly in silence. I could see the anger still simmering beneath his calm exterior, but there was something else too, something that looked like regret. "I can't forgive you," he said, stirring his coffee without looking at me. "Not completely, but maybe we can start over. Try to rebuild something." It wasn't the reconciliation I had hoped for, but it was more than I deserved. We sat there, talking about everything and nothing, both of us knowing that things would never be the same. But it was a start. In the weeks that followed, I slowly started picking up the pieces of my life. It wasn't easy. The weight of the past never fully left me, and there were days when I wondered if I'd ever escape it. But then, one day, I met someone new. Her name was Maria, and she was nothing like Sophia or Bree. She was kind, patient, and exactly what I didn't know I needed. We spent hours together, talking about life, our dreams, and the things we'd been through. With her, there were no games, no lies, just honesty. One evening, we sat on the beach watching the sunset. For the first time in a long while, I felt something close to peace. The mistakes, the betrayals, and the chaos, they were still there, lingering in the back of my mind. But they didn't define me anymore. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Maria took my hand, and I realized something important. Life goes on, even when it feels like everything has fallen apart. Maybe, just maybe, this was the start of something new.